Hello there and welcome to Laurence Plays Factorio, and today we're going to take a look at something a little bit different because Marc has been putting in a load of effort recently to produce a version of LTN that can be run without any mods installed at all. So this system works entirely using vanilla Factorio 2.0 features such as interrupts and all the other sort of train goodies that come with them. The point of an LTN system is to allow you to use your trains in more or less the same way you use logistic spots. So you have some stations that are for picking things up, you have other stations for drop-off, and you also have some depot stations as well, which are slightly aside. And the idea is that you have a standard train design that can go out to any place that's offering up a particular resource, and then it will take it to any place that's requesting that resource. So you don't need to worry about setting up specific train routes, you don't need to worry too much about exactly how you've got your trains configured. You can just put in more and more stations and have them requesting or providing certain resources, and the system will work out for you exactly where the trains need to go without you needing to create too many additional ones to keep everything running. This sort of system consists of a number of different elements. You've got the provider stations like this one here, where resources are made available to the train system. You've got requester stations like this one, which pull in resources from the train system and then unload them into the rest of your factory. You've got a number of depot stations where the trains wait when they're not in use. And then of course you've got the trains themselves. And I'll run through each of these parts in turn and give you an idea of how the system works and what signals you need to put in here to make it work. But one of the big advantages of a system like this is you can have everything set up through blueprints in your game, which will allow you to then specify all of the bits and pieces you could possibly want. And then when you put in a station, it will all be fully set up for you and will guide you through the process of configuring it. But we'll look at that a little bit later on. The first and simplest part of the setup that we're going to take a look at is the requester station. So these are the ones that the trains have to bring stuff over to and drop it off at. And so as such, these stations are responsible for saying when they're short of something and asking for a train to come and get it. And the way that works is, you can see along here, we've got all of these chests connected together along the green cable, which then goes into this combinator here. And if we have a look at this combinator, you can see that it's saying if the amount of plastic on the incoming signal is less than 48,000, then output 1L signal. That signal goes to the station and it sets the train limits to 1. It also then goes to this combinator here, where the L signal is multiplied by -1 and then output it as a plastic signal in this case, so whatever this station is asking for. And that signal is passed out onto the green cables, and these green cables are sent around the entire factory and eventually back to the depot. And what this means is that if there's less than that amount of plastic in the station, then this combinator will send out an L signal to the station, setting the train limit to 1 and therefore allowing a train to come here. And it will also send out a -1 plastic onto the network that tells the network that there is a station somewhere that requires some plastic to be brought to it. One additional note that you might have noticed as I was going through is that we're also watching for C on here, and C is being fed back from the station itself, and that's the number of trains that are coming to this station. And this says that only send this signal out if there isn't a train coming here, and that means that the request will be cancelled as soon as there is a train on its way here with some plastic. Now you might have noticed there is a slight complication there in that the train has to go to another station first before it can come to this one, but don't worry, we'll get back to that later. The next step in the chain is the depot stations, and these are where the trains wait when they don't have a job to do, and they'll sit here happily waiting to be given instructions to send them off to go and pick up some resources. And so we've got down here at the bottom, we've got a counter, and this counter is counting from 1 to 120 by using the decider combinator here to monitor the number that's being counted to, and if it's less than 120 it will output that count onto the output, which is fed back into the input, but as soon as that gets to 120 then it'll reset itself, and that number is being fed in from the constant combinator down here at the bottom. So we will get a number that counts from 1 to 120 being fed out along this red cable. That's fed into this combinator here, where we see it watching to see if this number is 2, and whenever it is 2, we get all the signals that are coming in on the green cable being flashed over briefly on the output over here. And when they come out from here, they're then fed into the station and they're passed on to the train. And so most of the logic is done in the train, but down here we've got a system that watches, and then every so often it will pass the signals on. And each one of these combinators will have a different number programmed into it. So that one was 2, this one is 4, this one is 6, and so on, all the way up the chain here. So, and that means that each individual train will get a signal at a different time. And that means that if a train departs to go and fulfill an order, then another train won't see the same order, and therefore you won't have a second train going off to go and get exactly the same thing as well. This brings us on to the most complicated part, the train. So here you can see the train has one permanent instruction, and that is to go back to the depot whenever it doesn't have anything else to do, and it will sit there until it's been completely fueled. So it will never leave until it has got a full supply of fuel in the locomotive. And that's important because we don't want a train to be running out of fuel halfway around the system, and we don't want to have to add in extra interrupts to tell it to go and refuel. It might as well just refuel in the depot. Why would you do anything else? Then we have the interrupts down here. We have the round trip interrupt, and this is where all of the sort of the clever brains of the system happen. And if we open this up to edit it, you can see this is watching the signals that are coming in from the station, and it's watching for anything being less than 0. And if it gets a signal that's less than 0, that means there is somewhere requesting a particular resource. And it doesn't matter what that resource is, because we're using the wildcard signal, and that means it'll scan through and it'll find the first one that passes all of the weight conditions, as it says, and then it will replace the green signal with that throughout the instructions. So it's watching for a signal that is less than 0 and a station called that thing provider not being full, and a station called that thing's requester not being full. And that means it will wait until there's a provider station that has enough stock to fill up a train, and therefore is advertising itself as not being full, where full in this case means full of trains, not full of resources. And also there is a requester station that is also not full, meaning not full of trains, and therefore is asking for a train to be brought over, as we saw earlier, where we're setting the train limit with that L signal. If it sees a resource that matches all three of these criteria, then it will pass it on, and it will program in these two targets down here, and it will add these two stations to the train's itinerary. So it'll add in the something provider and the something requester. Maybe this will be iron ore or plastic or red circuits, anything like that, and it will add them in saying go to the provider and wait there until you've got a full inventory, then go to the requester, wait till you've got an empty inventory, and then these instructions will be deleted as the train goes round, and it will return back to the depot. Switching over to a train that is actually in the process of doing these things, you can see this one has been given a iron ore provider temporary station and an iron ore requester temporary station. It's come over to the provider station that was making the iron ore available, and it's filling up. Once it completely fills up, this instruction will be removed because it's a temporary station, and then it will head over to the requester station where it will then be able to drop off the iron ore, and then that instruction will be deleted as well, and it will return to the depot ready to be used again for another trip, at least once it's refueled. The final part of this system is the provider stations. So these work similarly to the requester stations in that we're monitoring the amount of resource in the station with this green cable that runs all the way along here. That's then being fed into a combinator here where we're saying if there's more than 8,000, which is an amount that goes in a train, then send out an L signal. That L signal is then being fed into the station, and in exactly the same way as before, that's setting the train limits to 1. So we have a station here that is ready for a train to come over to it, and in fact there's one that is setting off and is coming over here, probably to this station, so it can come over and pick up some more of the iron ore. And so that tells the system that this station is currently active and ready to feed those resources out. The other part, the part that Marc was very, very proud of, he says is very clever, is this bit here where you're reading the train count. And this is reading how many trains are on their way to this station or currently in the station. And that, as you can see, is being output as the resource that comes from this particular station. So when there is a train on its way over here, this feeds out 1 iron ore onto the network. And that cancels out the -1 iron ore that was being fed out from the requester station, saying that it needed some iron ore, and that means they cancel out, and therefore you will only get 1 train being sent off to each request. When the train leaves the depot and is coming out to the provider station, this train count reader here, which is feeding out +1 iron ore, cancels out the -1 that's being sent out by the requester station. When the train leaves the provider station and is on its way to the requester station, then we'll see the train count will come out as a C here, which is fed back into this combinator, and then this will be greater than 0, and so that will stop the L signal being sent out to the station and also to the other combinator, and therefore will prevent the -1 iron ore being sent out on the network as well. So at any stage there is always something preventing an additional signal being sent back to the depot and an additional train being dispatched. And Marc has said that that was the most challenging part of coming up with the design, was making sure that for every request that was placed, that 1 train and 1 train only was dispatched to go and sort it out. Fluid trains and fluid stations work in exactly the same way, however they're named slightly differently. So there's this extra liquid drop in the station name. So this one is, for example, this one is called light oil liquid drop provider, whereas the one down here is simply called iron ore requester. It doesn't have an extra symbol in there, and that allows it to tell the difference between stations that are providing solids and stations that are providing fluids to ensure that you send the right sort of train over there, because we've got fluid trains and we've got solids trains. That's nice and simple, but you need to make sure that the right sort of train goes over there. And so this train, for example, is monitoring for anything that comes in that involves a fluid provider or a fluid requester station. The other clever bit of this, as I hinted at, is with the blueprints for setting these stations up. So to make it as easy as possible to drop a station in, well, if we have a look at this station here, you can see that on these two combinators over here, they are set with parameters on them. And they're both set up to be the same parameter. We're asking for what the requested item is in this case. And then we've got some numbers in here to make sure you get the right sort of stack sizes being set up and so on. But this means that when you place one of these stations like so, it then asks you what this station is supposed to be asking for. So at this point, maybe I would go in and I'd say, well, for this one, maybe we're after iron ore. So we're going to provide iron ore from here, apparently. We're not, because this isn't a proper station. There isn't actually a mine here, but if we were, this would work. And now you can see that has automatically programmed the combinator over here to be telling the system about the correct resource if we fed iron ore in there. You would then need to come along and hook that up with a green cable like so, just to make it work properly. And also finish off the railway lines at both ends there. That is all you need to do to drop the stations in. A requester station is exactly the same, except it's got two combinators that will be programmed, but they will both be programmed automatically from just selecting the same single item when you're setting it up. And so, with this system, you've got a lot of the functionality of LTN. You only have to have a limited number of trains, and they'll go off and provide and do whatever grabs and drop-offs are required. So you don't have to think too carefully about adding in additional trains when you add in additional stations that are using resources or providing resources. You don't have to worry about exactly how many iron ore trains you've got, because you can just use any train when it can come out of the depot and do the deliveries from there. There are a couple of features that LTN provides that this system doesn't work with, unfortunately. So one of the big things is that you can't have multiple pickup or multiple drop stations with this system. And that's because it relies entirely on the names of the stations. So this one here is a coal requester, for example. So you couldn't drop anything else off here because the station would need to have a different name. And in vanilla, there isn't any way to automatically rename a station based on it requiring something different. So there's no way to do multiple drop-offs at a single station. Additionally, we can't do round robin. The trains will always go to the nearest station that is requesting a particular resource. So if you have your iron mines over here, and then you've got, say, 3 or 4 different areas that are all requesting iron ore, they will end up always bringing it to the first one until you have enough to satisfy the first one, at which point they'll start bringing it to the second one, and so on. So it's not got all of the functionality of LTN, but it has replicated an impressively large amount of it for what is an entirely vanilla system. In case you're not aware, this system was built up by Marc specifically for our Planetary Pioneers run, because he's in charge of Norvis and wanted to build up a massive self-contained city block system, ideally not using LTN as far as he could. And so that's something he's been putting together in our Monday night streams. So please come along to the streams on every Monday night at 7:30 PM UK time and check it out yourself, see what we've built up and how it's working. We'll be making the blueprints and the bit of description about how the system works available to channel supporters on the Discord server. So if you are a channel supporter, please come along to the Discord server, have a look on there in the bonus content area, and you'll find all the blueprints and instructions on how to set them up. If you're not a channel supporter but you'd like to be, then please become a YouTube member or a Twitch subscriber, or drop in some donations on Ko-Fi, and you'll get full access almost immediately. This has been something a little bit different. I hope you found it interesting and it's whetted your appetite for more Planetary Pioneers content. If so, there'll be another video coming out tomorrow where I'm going to be talking about some of our opinions on some of the things that have been going on around the factory and around the solar system as we've been gradually expanding. So yes, please come along to that and see what we've been up to. And yeah, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on anything that's coming up in the future. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.